All right, so we've been keeping up with the ongoing negotiations surrounding Joe Biden's proposed roughly $2 trillion infrastructure package, and part of that package is going to be taxes. And Joe Biden, and we're going to get to some of the framing around this because I think that's really the most important part of this entire discussion, but Joe Biden is basically proposing tax raises for corporations and wealthy individuals. And we've talked about the details of this tax proposal, how Joe Biden doesn't go nearly far enough. But even the moderate tax hike for corporations that Joe Biden is proposing is not enough for King Manchin, who remains to be seemingly the most powerful person in the world right now. And it seems like he has gotten his way on yet another thing. So progressives fume, that's me, as Democrats eye smaller corporate tax hike to appease centrists, quote unquote centrists. Saying corporations must pay their fair share should mean that pre-Trump rates are the starting point. So what are they talking about here? Senate Democrats are reportedly considering lowering the corporate tax rate proposed in President Joe Biden's infrastructure plan from 28% to just 25%. To mollify centrists in the caucus, a backtrack that would leave hundreds of billions of dollars in potential revenue on the table. Citing sources close to negotiations over the nascent infrastructure package, Axios reported Sunday that Democrats close to the White House expect Biden will accept the 25% and pocket it as a political win. Joe Biden is going to pocket an increase from the current corporate tax rate, which is 21%, to 25%. He's going to count that as a victory. And why is this not a victory? Well, first of all, this is called the ratchet effect, okay? If you go on Google and you Google the ratchet effect, amazingly, I don't know how, but one of my tweets comes up, and I think it comes up because this is the perfect example of the ratchet effect, what we are seeing right now with Joe Biden. So, as I pointed out, this was a tweet from March 17th, but Trump cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, okay? Biden's plan is to raise it back only to 28%, now 25% with his compromise with Manchin. And this is the ratchet effect. It's not Biden being a progressive. So some people are going to give Joe Biden credit for raising corporate taxes, even though this is the ratchet effect. I mean, this is a perfect example of it. Republicans, Trump in this case, with his 2017 tax cut that went primarily to wealthy individuals, Trump cuts the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Joe Biden is, hailed as some sort of FDR, some big, bold progressive for trying to raise it up to a 28%. And now it looks like he's willing to compromise with Joe Manchin to make it just a 25% corporate tax rate. So you're only going up not even halfway from where it used to be. So this is, it's pathetic. That's all you can say about it. It's absolutely pathetic. And it doesn't even make sense, not only from this angle of the ratchet effect and how Republicans are constantly moving us towards the right and Democrats are blocking the pathway towards the left, but it also doesn't make sense from the standpoint of popularity. So here was a recent pollster who worked with the Joe Biden administration, and he was pointing out that with the infrastructure package, with how this polling has been done, and I'll read you some of the details, but basically, the infrastructure package gets more popular when you tell people about the fact that you're going to be increasing taxes on the rich. So increasing taxes on wealthy individuals, Biden's plan is only people over $400,000 a year. And for corporations, obviously, these are extremely popular things. People want to tax the rich. I mean, we've seen over the course of the pandemic, all of these billionaires, all of these corporations raking in billions and billions and billions in profits while everyday Americans are struggling. And so, of course, people want to tax the rich. And of course, Biden should take the offensive, as this pollster points out. They say, the top pollster for Joe Biden's presidential campaign is advising the White House to do something that often makes Democrats nervous: talk loudly and proudly about raising taxes on the rich. Why does it matter? John Anzalone tells Axios his extensive polling and research has found that few issues receive broader support than raising taxes on corporations and people earning more than $400,000 a year. So this is something where Democrats could use it to their advantage, right? So typically how Democrats talk about raising taxes on the rich is they're like, oh, well, we don't like raising taxes, but our hands were tied behind our back and we had to raise them and we're really sorry about it, etc. That's not the approach that you should be taking. Raising taxes on the wealthy and corporations is popular. People like that. People want you to do that. So go out and make the positive case for that. Go out and make that a selling point. But of course, how are you going to make this a selling point when you're appeasing Joe Manchin and lowering the corporate tax rate even further? I mean, it's ridiculous. They're going in the complete opposite direction. What they should be doing is raising it even above what it was pre-Trump levels at 35%. Why not take it to 40%, 50% for corporations? Why not? We've had these same tax rates in the past. And these things are overwhelmingly popular. So you should be taking the offensive on these things, not acting as if it's some sort of a negative that, oh, we're raising taxes on corporations. And even for somebody like Joe Manchin, okay? This is another thing that really bothers me all the time. People talk about Joe Manchin having a conservative constituency, and they talk about that as if it's all across the board conservative. That's not necessarily true. West Virginia actually has a long history involving unions and working class movements and labor movements in that state. And so they might be conservative on cultural issues like gun control or other things like that, but they might be more left-leaning economically. So I'm 100% sure that West Virginia voters would also favor raising taxes on wealthy corporations. Of course they would. But of course, that's the sort of narrative that the media gives to Joe Manchin to say, oh, well, he's just he has a conservative constituency. What is he supposed to do? Of course no. West Virginia voters, your average voter doesn't give a shit if you raise taxes on corporations. They're not going to be offended by that. They might not like it if you raise their taxes, but that's not what we're talking about doing here. So it's entirely a bullshit premise that Democrats are running with to act as if taxing the rich is like a terrible thing that they just are forced to do. And that gets into the final point that I want to make here. The underlying implications of what all of this is saying. Biden wants to pay for infrastructure plan with 15 years of corporate taxes. So is it a good thing that Joe Biden wants to raise taxes on the wealthy? Yes. Why is it a good thing? It's a good thing because corporations currently don't pay anywhere close to enough. Even the 21% tax rate, that's not their actual tax rate. And if you were going to raise taxes on corporations to, let's say, back to the original pre-Trump levels of 35%, corporations still would not be paying 35%, okay? With all of these deductions and the rebates that they get, it would be somewhere closer to probably in the teens or the low 20s that they would be paying as an effective rate. And as we've seen with recent stories, many corporations don't pay anything in taxes. So even if you don't, close all the loopholes that these corporations are using to not pay taxes, then these higher tax rates are almost a moot point because they're not actually paying the rates that are being espoused or talked about. But the thing that I wanted to make a point about here is this framing that Joe Biden needs to tax corporations and wealthy individuals X amount of dollars in order to spend X amount of dollars in his infrastructure package is a false premise. Okay, that's not how government spending works. How government spending works, especially on something like infrastructure, is you can see direct material benefits down the line. So when you spend money on infrastructure, you're building out your economic sectors. You are creating new jobs. You are expanding your economic producing capabilities. So it is a plan when you invest in infrastructure that pays for itself. It's not like that money just goes out the window. So the narrative, the idea that you need to tax X amount from rich people or corporations in order to pay for X amount in infrastructure is a false premise that we can't afford to buy into. We should be spending, as a default minimum, $10 trillion over the next 10 years. That's what people are estimating we need in order to seriously address our infrastructure problems and climate change. So that's what we really should be talking about as a bare minimum. But instead, they're hampered by this false narrative in their own minds that somehow you need to tax back every single dollar that you spend on this infrastructure package. And that's a bad thing if Joe Manchin and conservatives like him are getting their way on a lot of these tax issues. Because if you lower taxes that you're going to be levying against these corporations, leaving, like Common Dreams pointed out, hundreds of billions of dollars on the table, if you're going to lower that threshold, then Joe Biden is going to turn around and probably hamper down the rest of the infrastructure package. So it's bad all around. It's the wrong mindset for them to be approaching here. On infrastructure, you need to go big or you need to go home. I mean, you need to be spending upwards of at least $5 trillion over the next 5 years is what the American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that we need to bring our infrastructure up to a grade of a B+. So that's the bare minimum, $10 trillion over the next 10 years as outlined by the Sunrise Movement and the Thrive Agenda. That's what we really need to be pushing for here. And it's just honestly pathetic that they're cutting down or watering down the level that they're willing to tax corporations, because he knows damn well that this is popular. He knows damn well that this is necessary. And they're just doing this to appease Joe Manchin for his own ego.